What's up, guys, and welcome into Dog Central on a Wednesday night. If you're watching this on the East Coast, it is a little bit before 10 o'clock, so a little late going on air, but hope you guys are joining in anyways, and hope that you're all having a good week. Happy hump day. Hope that y'all are starting to enjoy some nice spring weather, a little warmth, and some stuff that's starting to feel like we're getting closer to college football season. The warm weather comes back around, so starting to get those juices flowing a little bit. Welcome in. If you're new here, please subscribe to our YouTube channel on Dog Central, and please come and subscribe to Dog Central on the Players Lounge for really, really in-depth analysis and all sorts of the latest UGA intel and information. All right. So we're a little bit kind of in the slower part of the off season, although we do have spring meetings starting up. So there will be some talking points that come out of that, I'm sure. But tonight we are going to talk a little UGA recruiting. I'm going to answer some subscriber questions about week one. And I am also going to do something I've never done before, but a lot of you have asked. So I'm going to do my coach rankings for the first time in my quote unquote media career, if you want to call it that. I'm gonna get into it, and I'll try to give you guys the logic and the breakdown of why I'm sort of putting these guys where I am, and the belief systems behind it. So every offseason you get these coach lists on message boards, and they really are like they're good fodder for call-in shows, for shows like this, for anyone that's trying to kill some time in the off season. So shout out to the coach ranking list, whoever did it first. You are a genius. I am not a big fan of doing the hot take awards where just I don't know, where I just say shit for no reason because it's going to piss somebody off and then they're going to engage with it because they're angry. I don't believe in that. I don't really think it's honest. And I think that eventually, if you do stuff like that, that users, viewers, subscribers, whoever they are, they catch on and they eventually want to go find analysis elsewhere. At least I hope they do. That's the market that we're trying to capture, right? So, what I am looking for when I do evaluate coaches is obviously a multifaceted kind of system or a rating tier that I've put together here. But I want to make sure that I give you guys my logic, because sometimes I feel like these lists are like a black box and you don't really understand why somebody has put someone where they have. So traits that I am looking at. Number one, talent acquisition, right? Kirby Smart says it really well. Like, scheme doesn't beat talent. Talent's gonna beat scheme when you have overwhelming amounts of talents. Cliches are cliches for a reason, right? Not the X's and the O's, but it is the Jimmy and Joes that matter. A good play call is going to help a team, but plays are usually only as good as the guys that are executing. So I think that's important. There are multiple ways to acquire talent in college football today, right? It can be through the portal. Obviously, I am going to give preference to coaches that recruit at the high school levels or evaluate at the high school levels at a clip that's better than their peers, and at a clip that is maybe above their historic ranking. Like, if you had to sign top 5 classes to be top 5 on my coaching list, then that would really be more dependent on where the job is. Like, not every job is going to recruit as well as the blue bloods are. So that doesn't necessarily eliminate you. Schematic expertise. If you're an offensive guru, great. If you're a defensive, mind, like, honestly, recent history would say that that's even better. You got if you look at the coaches that have been the most dominant over the last 20 or so years in college football, like uh, with the exception of that's it's not across the board, but like Saban obviously has been the biggest force in the sport over the last 2 decades. He had a defensive background. Kirby Smart, defensive background. Dabo, offensive guy. Like that's not to say that offensive guys can't make their way. There's plenty of good offensive coaches. Number two on my list is a guy that I would consider, an offensive mind. But there may actually be more value in having a head coach who has some defensive chops. But either way, if you can come in and fix one side of the ball, I'm gonna be on that. Culture building. I think a lot of that talk is overblown when you talk about like program culture and these guys really do things the right way, that kind of shit. But I do think managing the emotional swings of 18 to 22-year-olds is a really big part of the job that we don't talk about enough. So you get bonus points from me if your players play hard all the time. Dabo, for example, right? I'm going to talk about Dabo. There's a lot of things that I don't agree with, but like he gets points from me for the fact that, his team, when it fell out of the national title race last year, you didn't see a drop off in effort. You saw his guys show up for the bowl game. They played hard and they won against a good Kentucky team. So I believe that, that is something that we should at least consider. Managing up is a big thing for me. So what I mean by that is that I think credit should go to coaches who are able to maximize limited resources and turn a traditional basement dweller into a consistent winner. But I think it's actually harder to go to like a Texas, for example, or another school that has a lot of influential boosters, a lot of money, a lot of people who want to have their say so. You usually don't see those programs really pull in one direction unless you have a strong personality at the helm that is going to make sure everybody stays in line. Saban was great at that. Like he came into Alabama and took a booster culture that was extremely dysfunctional and got it pointed in the right direction. Hugh Freeze is not on my top 15 list, but like right now he's starting to kind of do that at Auburn. And, Gus Malzahn couldn't always keep everybody on the same page. Brian Harsin couldn't even tell you what page he wanted everyone to be on, but you get my point. And then game day decisions, right? If you do dumb stuff on game days that loses your team games, then I can get behind that. Like, if you consistently mismanage the clock, if you don't know how to use your timeouts, if your team shows up, wearing the wrong wristbands for the playbook that they're running or that kind of stuff, like you can't be on my list. So sorry, Mario Cristobal, you were not on our top 15 list this year. You can't be on my list if you don't know how to take a knee and run out the clock in a game that you're just simple. All right. So let's get into the list. We're going to go 1 through 15 here. I'm just going to start firing them off. Number 1, Kirby Smart. It has been a while since it has been this easy to choose the number 1 name on a ranking of the sport's best coaches. With Saban retired, he is the clear-cut number 1. I don't really think there's any debate around it. He has achieved the most over the last, let's say, 3 years, right? What is he? He's what? 15, 14, like 30, 27, 42, and 2 over the last 3 years. I mean, like it's impressive numbers that we're talking about. And he's 39-0 in the regular season since losing to Dan Mullen in Florida in 2020 in Jacksonville. So it's been a while since Kirby, has lost a regular season game. The last guy who beat him in the regular season literally has not been in the sport since like November of 2021. I mean, like that's almost 3 years ago. So I think it's pretty obvious why he's there consistently. I mean, he's recruited a top 3 class, I think 7 years in a row now, going back to the 2017 cycle. Yeah, 7 years. I would suspect he'll do it in 2025. Uh, the other thing about Kirby is that he's using the transfer portal really, really well, right? Like Kirby is supplementing his elite high school talent with good transfer portal talent. Georgia's maybe struggled to attract like that bona fide top boundary receiver straight out of high school the last couple cycles. No problem. They go out and they go and get, Ra Thomas, Colby Young, Dom Lovett's not, a traditional X receiver, but talented guys like that. London Humphreys, I don't know how big an impact he'll have immediately, but I think he'll be impactful for Georgia over the next couple of years. So they are managing the portal the right way when it comes to incoming and outcoming for that matter. I really this past offseason, I didn't see Georgia lose a guy to the portal that I think they expected to be a starter for them. And there's not a lot of teams that can say that. There are a lot of programs that I know for a fact came in and offered some of Georgia's guys, particularly on the defensive line, like offered guys 10 times what they're making at NIL at Georgia right now to come and play for them this fall. And they didn't do it because the development and the chance to win national championships and the entire apparatus at UGA is all pointed in the right direction. And really, with the NIL era coming on, I think you could argue that, Kirby's raised to $13 million. The extra couple million a year that he just got it's good math on Georgia's part, because if NIL comes in house, they're going to save that money a couple times over in terms of the NIL discounts that they're getting from the top talent in the sport. So pretty easy number one. All right. I'm going to be honest with you guys, 2 through 7 or 8 on this list. I think you could, I really struggled with the name that I'm about to give you at number 2. I struggled putting it number 2, to be transparent, because I'm not sure he's the second best coach in the sport, but with Saban gone, there's kind of a dearth of accomplished coaches right now outside of Kirby, and obviously Dabo's got his 2 national titles, but he's doing so much stuff to hurt his program that it's hard. So Steve Sarkisian is my number 2 coach on my ranking list. Like I said, I've been critical of Sark in the past. This was the most challenging part of the exercise, but he gets the nod here for a couple of reasons. One, he got Texas football's massive booster culture, the dysfunction of that, got it aligned, has it moving in the right direction. He's got all those big personalities functioning in a cohesive manner. It's not easy to do. First time anyone's done it since Mac Brown was coaching Colt McCoy there, really. His game planning ability is well known. I think he's very much plus value on the offense. When they played Bama 2 years ago in Austin, and he almost won that game with Hudson Card, like just kind of by scheming some stuff up, I thought that was impressive, right? They're recruiting at a top 5-ish level right now. He's utilized the portal effectively. I think coming to the SEC is going to hurt him in the portal because once you hit the spring transfer window, SEC players cannot transfer to other SEC schools. And let's be honest, like Texas has relied on a lot of SEC transfers to fill out its defensive line. I think that, that is my big question for Sark and for Texas in general, especially after they lost the defensive line coach to LSU this offseason. Like, I thought their D line kind of got exposed against Washington in the college football playoff. When I think of Texas and I think of Washington, I think Texas should be able to recruit the big bodies in the trenches on defense to shoot some A gaps and collapse some run lanes on the inside and give problems to the interior of that offensive line. And they really couldn't do that. So that is my kind of to-do list item for Sark and for Texas. I also would go so far as to say that I think, they, at least in the spring game, what's going to happen with that secondary. That secondary got shredded against Washington as well, and Washington's offensive line was really good last year, and they were able to, with that vertical passing game, kind of uh, work around Texas's defensive tackles, but like they just lost, I think, a lot on defense, and I'm curious if they can reload. And they have a really easy schedule this year, so I don't know that it'll really bite them in the way of like, oh, you're coming in the SEC and now you're gonna get exposed on the trenches. I'm just not sure the teams they play are going to be able to do that. But I I'm not ready to say, I don't know that Texas is like a legit national title contender yet. So will be interesting to see what Texas looks like. Obviously, look at their shot at Georgia, but right now, if I look at this list and I look at the landscape of college coaching, and I look at guys in current jobs and sort of what they've proven in those jobs so far, I think that Sark has the best chance of sort of challenging Kirby and elevating that program. He's got NIL resources. He's got to figure out some things on defense, like we said. But if you get Texas pulling in one direction, then it can be a very powerful force in the giant game of tug of war that exists between college football programs. So I think he's doing that. Number 3, also going to probably be a little bit of a not controversial choice, but maybe surprising. I went with Kyle Whittingham here. Okay. And this probably says a good bit about what I believe about how football is won. I think that football is won from the inside out. I think that, yes, like the game has gotten more spread out. We have, teams playing on all 53 and a half yards laterally. You've got these hyper spread offenses. You have 4 and 5 wide receivers. Defenses are almost never playing with just 4 defensive backs anymore. That's almost unheard of. But what Whittingham has done is find a way to basically expose that trend and get in there and do, I think, operate a program that very much like makes the most out of what it gets its hands on. They are not a blue blood title contender. Utah is not, they're not competing for national titles right now. I know they almost went to the playoff a couple years ago, but he has taken Utah from Mountain West, middle of the pack to upper tier Mountain West program, depending on the year, to the top of the Pac-12. I know that, I think what impressed me the most about him when I was going through this exercise was thinking about how much Cam Rising meant to that program in 2022, and the fact that they navigated 2023 without him and it wasn't a total disaster. And they also, by the way, had injuries all else, up and down the roster and a bunch of other places. And look, he got his team a win over USC in Los Angeles, despite having third string quarterback / pig farmer Bryson Barnes against number 1 overall pick / Heisman Trophy winner Caleb Williams. You get points for me on that. I think that, that is kind of emblematic of what they've become, which is maybe the best problem solving program in the country, really. Like, they figure out how to scheme around resources, and they figure out how to maximize the ones that they have. What they've done with their tight ends in some recent years has really impressed me, finding out ways to run the 13 personnel, 12 personnel stuff, and get really physical with teams that I think in a lot of cases, like, we would admit are sound on the line of scrimmage. I am interested to see how the move to the new Big 12 works out in general, just sort of like what that conference, what kind of staying power it has. But I think Whittingham has Utah poised to be the dominant program in the revamped Big 12. And the conference champion of the Big 12 is going to get an automatic top 4 seed, at least for the next couple of years. So I just think if you're talking about a guy who consistently schemes it up, and makes the most out of what he has available to him. I'm going to go with Kyle Whittingham. Number 4, Brian Kelly. Uh, to be totally transparent, I struggle with the idea of putting Brian Kelly in the top 5 after LSU's 2023 defense was ranked 13th or 14th in the SEC in pretty much every major statistical category. The DBs that LSU fielded last season, like, they were just not up to the standards of like a legit, top tier Power 5 program. The flip side of that is that the offense obviously did what it did. It was historically good. Produced a first round quarterback and 2 first round receivers, I believe. Like, out, he gets points for that, and he gets points going back to his Notre Dame days for kind of maximizing whatever personnel he has on offense. I think he's a better offensive sort of mind than people give him credit for. I know he's not calling plays necessarily, but I think he does a good job of sort of overseeing the operation and picking the philosophical direction that he wants his coordinator to go with on offense. The thing that I ding him for is, like, I struggle with the recent comments on the transfer portal, basically saying we're not going to buy players in reference to their need for a defensive tackle in the spring window. The reality is that it is a coach's responsibility to build a roster, and Kelly is the guy that, failed to build that roster, right? Like, he is it's his job to make sure that they don't have a hole on the defensive line when they get to the spring window. If you get to the spring window and you have a hole on the defensive line, then you're going to have to pay for it. Like, talent comes in a premium if you wait till the last moment to take care of the problem. I thought, he came to LSU because he wanted to be at a program that was more serious about bringing in top talent, more committed to recruiting top talent. Like, maybe the NIL collectives aren't as flush, and that might have been the real issue. And I'll say that, saying we don't want to buy players is a better a better thing than saying, our NIL collective didn't have the money right now. I don't know if that's the case or not. It's just a speculation on my part, but he has been recruiting well out of high school. They've got already the makings of a top 5 recruiting class for 2025. I think they have the number 1 class in 2025 at the moment, depending on the service. Obviously, it's too early to draw too much into that, but like, they got a commitment from Bryce Underwood, which will set the future of that quarterback room for a while. They were able to retain Garrett Nussmeier through another year of Jaden Daniels. He's done a good job of managing the overall offensive talent, and the recruiting has been promising. And I think he's done a good job on the offensive line there as well. So, yeah, Kelly is one of those that I look at, and him in that job at LSU, I can't rule out the chance of them winning a national title in the next 5 years. So he's going to go at number 4. And part of that is obviously, like, he got Notre Dame to function at the peak that I think modern Notre Dame can function. So credit to him on that. All right. Number 5, Ryan Day. Ryan Day signs top 5 classes every year. We know that. He's almost always fielded excellent offenses, and he has shown a solid understanding of how to use the portal to improve his team. He, is on the fringe basically of the top 5 for 2 reasons, right? First is that he didn't muster a national title out of a 4-year stretch of elite quarterbacking. Dude had Justin Fields from 2019 to 2020, and CJ Stroud from 2021 to 2022. And that period also coincided with Ohio State having 4 wide receivers taken within the first 20 overall picks of the last 3 NFL drafts. So he had, like, the type of offensive talent that LSU had last year. Like, you could argue that, there are some fair comps in terms of just skill position talent when you talk Stroud and the receivers that he was throwing to 2019 LSU when Joe Burrow had Jamar Chase and all of those guys. So like, did he miss out on his window to have the Burrow Chase Jefferson type year where he just blew everything up? I don't know. That's my concern for him. I think his window to win big might be closing. The recruiting would say no, though. Like, you know, not every prospect hits, so we'll see. But my biggest question about Ryan Day is his ability to surround all of that skill talent with the proper edge. I know he got mad about Lou Holtz questioning the toughness of his program, but I think Lou Holtz made some fair points. Like, Ryan Day did spend the entire uh, 2022 to 2023 offseason complaining about a hit on Marvin Harrison Jr. instead of looking at his guys and saying, hey, like, shit happens. That's how the game goes. We should have been ready to have the next man step up and win the game. I think that, in a lot of cases, he is a bit of an excuse maker, and attitude reflects leadership, Captain, right? Isn't that the Remember the Titans quote? Like, I do wonder about that with Ryan Day, and I think it's a fair thing to ask. Michigan just beat Ohio State 3 years in a row, despite having recruiting classes with an average ranking of 11th over the 5 prior cycles. Like, they just did that basically by bullying Ohio State at the point of attack. So let's see. I think this year is a big year for Ryan Day. Their NIL collective has done a really great job. Their boosters have been extremely supportive of their efforts, both in high school recruiting and the transfer portal. Like, they have gone all in after watching Michigan win a national title. Like, that ate those folks up for good reason. It's their arch rival. And now you're in a spot where if you can't turn all of the resources that have been put into this roster for 2024 into, like, at least a semifinal run in this new playoff, then I don't think he's the guy. But he also does win like 11 games every year, so I don't know. I think Ohio State is a program that, considering the resources and how vast they are, like, a competent coach probably should be winning 10 or 11 games there every season. All right. Number 6. This is going to be a surprise for some of you. That's okay, though. I went with Lance Leipold. I know that, that is maybe a little bit out of left field, because what's a Kansas coach doing on the top 10 of my coach rankings? Well, I'll tell you why. We don't know what Leipold would do at a bigger program. So until we know, that's a question mark. But what he's done at Kansas and Buffalo is more than enough to warrant his inclusion here. He has made Kansas football fun. Like, it's fun to watch Kansas play. That program won 15 games total from 2013 to 2020. Now they've won the same number of games as they did over that 8-season stretch in the last 2 years. They won 9 games last season. I also have been really impressed with the way that he kind of, he came in 2021 in like a year zero type of scenario, instilled his culture, created good habits within his team, and they've been on the upswing ever since. Of all the coaches who have like shown success at traditional doormats, Leipold is probably the best equipped to replicate those results at a high level. And that's because he can recruit. Like, he's recruiting the high school level really well by Kansas's historical standards. They signed the Big 12's 4th best recruiting class in the 2024 cycle. And coming in, they came in at a respectable 41st in the national rankings. I know, my SEC heavy audience is going to laugh at that probably, but like, that's a big deal for them. They were, they signed the last ranked recruiting class in the conference in the 2023 cycle, and it was still an improvement from the 126th ranked class that Kansas signed in 2022. So, guy went up like 80 spots in the national recruiting rankings in 2 cycles. And I think that if the on-field success continues to translate, like they might become a sustainable force in this new Big 12 because there's this power vacuum without Texas and Oklahoma in that conference. They also get bonus points from me for figuring out how to keep Jalen Daniels. I know that there were multiple programs that would have loved to have brought him in this offseason. I know Lincoln Riley was hot after him. So shout out to those guys. I think they're doing a really good job. Number 7. I struggled between 7 and 8. I'll tell you who 8 is after I tell you 7. But 7 is where I went with DeBoer. A lot of coach rankings. I've seen a lot of coach rankings this offseason that have put him in the top 3. I think that he might belong there in a year or two, but for right now, that feels premature to me. His ability to construct an offense is not in question, but at Washington and Fresno State, he showed that he could instill a winning mindset and turn things around quickly. Great. That's awesome. But I'm not sure if he can manage up yet. Like, I would say that culturally speaking, the Washington job that he just came from is probably closer to the environment of Fresno State than it is the environment at Alabama. That is a big animal that, it's a massive time suck, and there's 1,000 demands on him, and there's 1,000 personalities to manage. And how can he, how will he handle that? Will he get all those boosters pulling in the right direction? How are things going to look after he loses a couple games? Like, those are all open-ended questions that I'm waiting for answers for. I also have questions about his ability to acquire talent. He deserves a ton of credit for Washington's 2023 success, but I think it's been very, very overlooked what he inherited. Like, everyone's talked about, oh, they won all this and they did great. But the reality is that Chris Peterson curated Washington's 2023 roster. Okay. Kalen DeBoer recruited just 2 of Washington's national championship game starters. Both those guys were transfers. Before he left Seattle for Tuscaloosa, he had not shown a ton of recruiting chops. 41 Huskies played snaps in the 2024 national championship game. Only 2 of those were recruited to Washington by DeBoer's staff out of high school, and neither of those guys played 10 snaps in the title game. Chris Peterson regularly had classes like in that top 15 kind of area at Washington. DeBoer never anywhere near that. Granted, he only had a couple cycles there. So, maybe he would have gotten there. It's just an unknown. Until we know that, I don't know how you can put him at number 2 or number 3 on one of these coach ranking lists. If he had stayed at Washington, I think there's a good chance that he would have had a fallback year pretty similar to what Sonny Dykes had at TCU last year. Like, I'm not saying he would have only won 6 games, but I think they would have probably hit the new Big Ten and slid back to 8-4, right? So I don't know if he can, recruit the high school level yet. I'm curious about sort of the overarching culture stuff at a place like Bama when there is so much like bombardment from the outside on everybody in the organization. If he goes out and he starts recruiting top 5 classes and shows that he can keep their boosters on the same page, then he'll be up in the top 4 of this list next year. But for right now, I can't do it. All right. Number 8, Dan Lanning. If you're running a major SEC program and you have to hire a coach tomorrow, who's your first call to? I think it's Dan. I think Dan Lanning is the guy you call. If I was assuming that's, obviously that would be assuming that Kirby and Sark are off limits, then yeah, I think you're calling Lanning. So far, he looks like the apple that fell closest to the Kirby Smart trunk on the Kirby Smart coaching tree. Like, his ability to motivate his team and get them to play hard has been proven. We know he understands how to assemble and run an elite defense. He loves to recruit, does it eagerly. I know that a lot of people have questions of whether or not his success on the trail is, all about Phil Knight's Nike money and that being channeled into Oregon's NIL. Sure, it hasn't hurt, of course, but at the same time, like I do think he showed at Georgia that he can recruit with the best of them. He went up against a lot of people for big time recruits on defense. And he also was one of the rare kind of guys on Kirby's staff who would sort of come in and pinch hit and recruit players at other positions. Normally, the only ones that Kirby has doing that are kind of the elite level recruiters. So I don't have questions about his recruiting ability at any program. The other thing I would say is that he needs to manage his games better. I think he's made some maybe reckless fourth down decisions at times in the last couple of years. But he's only 38 years old, and we've seen a lot of coaches kind of go through that early in his career. Kirby went through a couple spots where it was like, that decision may have or may not cost him the game. So interested to see how Lanning sort of evolves as an in-game coach. I think he's going to continue to be aggressive, but sometimes people excuse something as being aggressive when it's just a little reckless or not that well thought out. And I think that he's kind of teetered into that zone on a couple occasions. So interested to see how he develops. Wouldn't be shocked if he showed up in the new Big Ten and really made some noise this year and is up in the top 5 of this list or knocking on the door of it if this time next year. All right, number 9, I went with Chris Kleiman here. I really like Kleiman. I think that he is just one of those solid type of like gonna get the most out of his team kind of coaches. Shares a lot of qualities with former Kansas State coach Bill Snyder. And he's in the same job, but in the sense of like he can squeeze more out of his roster than almost anybody. Their 2022 roster was second to last in the Big 12 from a recruiting rating standpoint, and they won a conference title in a league that included Texas, Oklahoma, and eventual national runner-up TCU. So that impresses me. Last year, they had a roster that ranked 13th out of 14 teams in the Big 12 from a recruiting ranking standpoint. Still, won 9 games. They lost by 3 to Texas and Austin. They were beat on that 61-yard field goal at the buzzer by Mizzou. They were very much on the verge of having a very, very excellent season. So I think highly of him. I don't know what it would look like if he was at a bigger program necessarily. Like, I'm not sure, but I do think that he's doing a decent job with the portal considering the NIL resources that I would assume Kansas State has. And I think he'll be around for a while. I think he's got some decent, staying power. So should be interesting to watch. All right. So next up, I did go, I'm going Dabo at 10, and I actually bumped him down another couple spots today. I've been working on this list for, a week or so. And after seeing the stuff that he said on ACC Network today about, well, technically we took in transfers from the high school level this year. They're transferring to college. Like, dude, that shit is, I almost think he's trolling at this point, which if he is, then I guess it's actually kind of hilarious, but I don't know what to make of this guy. This is definitely a career achievement award. Like, the guy had a decade straight of top 10 finishes, 6 consecutive CFP appearances. The apex of that run, you had 2 national title wins over like peak Saban Alabama dynasty teams. You have like all this in the past. The problem is that nothing has really changed at Clemson as the sport has changed around them. Like, NIL and the transfer portal have changed the whole fabric of this sport. And he has not shown a willingness to adapt to that the way that his competition has. They were 39-3 from 2018 to 2020, and he turned those wins into his best recruiting classes. He got a third-ranked class in 2020, followed it with a fifth-ranked class in 2021. Like, they were recruiting some dudes, and that should have been the next generation of stars for Clemson. Like, those guys should have, basically come in and turned into the, the next crew that was competing for national titles. And they've gone 30-10 over the last 3 seasons with a average ranking of 16th in the final CFP ranking. So, my opinion of Sweeney continues to go down. I think there's all this attention on his stubbornness when it comes to the transfer portal. I think there should be more attention on his stubbornness when it comes to the offensive scheme that they're running at Clemson. Like, they were running the same offense in 2022 that they were running when Trevor Lawrence was a freshman, and probably honestly going back to like Taj Boyd and those guys. It's not something that maximizes talent. Like, you can run whatever you want if you got Trevor and Deshaun and you got Nuke Hopkins and all these dudes on the outside that you can throw the ball up to, but they don't have that now. And they still are kind of stuck in some of those same schematic patterns that they were a decade ago. I think that, when they brought in Garrett Riley at OC, I thought, all right, this is going to be interesting. He's going to come in and sort of infuse new life, and Dabo's showing that he's willing to make a big change. The problem is that Riley got there, and before his first game, Dabo's like, oh, well, we hired him to run the Clemson offense. And at that very moment, I put $100 on Duke's money line because I thought this guy is going to handicap himself. And that's exactly what he does. That's exactly what they did. Like, they did not have the best personnel last year, and particularly on the offensive line. And the stuff that they're running is not stuff that is helping their personnel weaknesses. So I think that they're kind of stuck in that. Obviously, Clemson and the 3 service academies are the only teams that didn't bring in a transfer this offseason, and they've lost 24 guys to the portal over the last 2 transfer cycles in 2022 offseason, 2023 to 2024 offseason. So it's not like they don't need numbers of scholarships. Dabo said on television today at ACC spring meetings that, they had 125 guys go through spring practice and 123 of them are still with the program. That is true, I'm sure. I don't doubt his math on that, but how many of those guys are actual scholarship guys? How many of those guys, would anyone else in college football put on their roster right now? It's hard to win big when you don't have depth. Everything has to go right, and especially now when you're talking potential expanded season with this new playoff. Like, it's stubborn as hell, and there's part of me that does respect him because there's something there philosophically that he believes in. But I also think some of this not bringing transfer portal guys in is a misguided sense of loyalty to a bunch of Dabo-like stories. They're on his own roster, a bunch of walk-on 5th-year, 6th-year guys that might be able to scratch their way into the rotation as the 7th or 8th receiver or the 5th linebacker or whatever it is. And it's just like, if that's what you want to do, then cool, I get it. That's great. That's nice on a certain level, but is Clemson paying you $11 million a year to make the walk-ons feel good? I don't know, man. I'm not sure. It just doesn't compute for me. So that's that. Number 10, Chris Kleiman, shares a lot of qualities. Or I'm sorry, I already did Kleiman. I apologize. Number 11 here. Mike Gundy. Look, everyone keeps calling on Mike Gundy's downfall. I'm going to do these last 5 kind of rapid fire, but everyone's calling on Gundy's downfall. At the end of the day, the guy's got 8 10-plus win seasons since 2010 at a school that didn't have a 10-plus win season for 20 years prior to that. Les Miles won a national title at LSU, and he topped out at 9-4 at Oklahoma State. it seemed for a while like Gundy was attached to every SEC job that opened. That era is kind of ended. Um, but I also think like that might be the best for everybody. Oklahoma State is his alma mater, and I think he's truly one of the best coaches in college football when it comes to evaluating scheme and personnel in season. Like if you give him, one skill player that he can sort of build things around, like he can take that and go win 10 games. I think that's impressive from just a drawn up ball plays standpoint. There are, there's been some times where the talent moving out of the program, like it hasn't looked good in terms of guys transferring out, or the recruiting hasn't been great at certain times. At others, it's been okay. But like at this point, the results kind of speak for themselves. He's been there for like 15 seasons, 14 seasons, and he he wins 10 games more often than not at a place that's really hard to do that. So um, shout out to Mike Gundy for just kind of chugging along. At 12, I went with Stoops, Mark Stoops. Obviously, Bob's not coaching anymore. But I think the greatest testament to Stoops' success is the fact that some Kentucky fans started to turn on him in the midst of 2023 season, and they went 7-6 last year. Like that used to be cause for celebration in Kentucky, and now they've kind of been not they've spoiled a little bit. They won 10 in 2018, they won 10 again in 2021, and it's a basketball school that has this like growing passion for the pigskin, and I think that's great. When he came in there, they had not won 10 games since 1977. The list of guys who have won big at Kentucky are basically like Mark Stoops and Bear Bryant and like George Blanda, maybe. I think I forget who was the coach in '77, but it ain't long. I think I give him some bonus points in the sense that like he's got a established culture. Teams play a physical brand of football. It exposes opponents who are not sound on the line of scrimmage, and he's done a good job of using the portal to infuse some skill talent into that team. Where that was kind of historically, I think, where they struggled a little bit was getting sort of some of that top end skill player brought into the program. Like he brought in Levis. He's trying to do kind of a similar type deal with Vandegrift. So it'll be interesting to see how 2023 or 2024 goes for them. But I just think he's a plus value coach that if you bring him into your program, you're going to get there's a lot of knowns with him. And I think he's recruited better than a lot of people give him credit for. Like guy signs top 25 classes at Kentucky, signed a 5-star offensive lineman a few years back. Like he's kind of checked a lot of the boxes. It would have been interesting to see how he would have done at Texas A&M if he had ended up taking that job, or whatever happened at the 11th hour there. Everyone says they broke up with the other person first. Who knows what the real truth is on that? But seems like he's at Kentucky to stay, and I think that's a good thing for Kentucky. So behind him, I went with Brom. I know that might surprise some people, but you kind of think about it. I mean, how many coaches take Purdue to the Big Ten title game? How many coaches are able to turn Purdue into a better job? It's basically him, right? His schematic ability as a former OC, a former offensive guy, I think is really good. It's allowed him to be efficient with his rosters, find ways to create productive offenses out of talent that's kind of often overlooked. Came into Louisville, got them off to a 9-1 start and ACC championship game appearance in his first season. I know it was a weak schedule, but he took advantage of it, which is what he was supposed to do. He also, I think, upgraded his roster, in some spots in a pretty considerable way through the portal this offseason. So he gets points for that. And I think, he seems poised to kind of at least try and challenge Clemson and Florida State at the top of the ACC this year. And both of them have a lot of question marks. So who knows what his 2024 could turn into. So I think Good coach, right? He belongs on this list. I went with Norvell at 14. I really struggle. The two things I struggle with Norvell are uh, his high school recruiting has not been, kind of up to snuff for FSU standards. And, he sort of lived out of the transfer portal, and I'm not sure how sustainable that will be. But damn, if they didn't do a really good job of like they got some guys out of the transfer portal that were obvious, but like they also brought in Jared Verse and some of that kind of stuff. One of you in the comments just mentioned the bowl game. Like I know that FSU got screwed by the playoff committee. Like I'm on the same page with that, but that was such a pathetic showing, and it does, kind of make you wonder, like this season coming up, if they had a couple quick losses or they kind of get knocked out of the playoff race, like are a bunch of guys going to sit out with soft tissue injuries and not really care anymore? I don't know. I know that that was a unique circumstance, so I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I did put him on this list for a reason. But there are questions I have about sort of some of that internal stuff. He gets a lot of credit though, in my book, for going to FSU, hiring good coaches. Like he brought in Dillingham before Dillingham went to Oregon and then got the ASU head coaching job. Like he's good at identifying assistants, and I think he's been really good at getting everyone at Florida State on the same page. And that program was really teetering on the edge of turning into like a 2010s Tennessee kind of story there for a little bit. Like with like there was a lot of just bad stuff in a row there through the Taggart situation. So I think that like he's really good from an administrative standpoint and for managing up. I just would like to see better high school recruiting, and it is fair or unfair, that Orange Bowl performance is something that like people are going to remember. You can say that it doesn't matter, whatever, and I get that bowls are technically exhibition games outside of the playoff, but just the way that all looked and felt, wasn't the best. So I think it'll be important for them to have, uh, kind of a strong showing on that front in 2024. All right, 15. There was a lot of guys I considered in this spot. I considered Kiffin. I considered, you know, different folks. Ultimately, I landed on Eli Drinkwitz here at 15. I think that I've been impressed with his ability to turn Missouri into like a winning program. I think he took his time there, kind of built things up the right way. He's recruited high school really well for Missouri standards. I always thought Gary Pinkel was one of the most underrated coaches in the sport for being able to win consistently there. He needs to continue to do what he did last year over the next couple seasons to really kind of, I think, cement his status among the top coaches in the sport. But I thought he had a great year last year. I think he's a better scheme guy than people give him credit for. I think his run concepts are really, really good. He's done a very good job of diagnosing how to attack Georgia in the run game the last couple of years. Does a lot of interesting things with his stretch zone and outside zone concepts. So I think what he's doing is, impressive, and I give him credit for it. I think that, shout out to him. Like you beat Georgia for a 5-star recruit basically 3 years in a row with Luther Burden, Williams Neri, and Zollers, the quarterback. Now, Missouri doesn't have to spread their NIL resources among like 70 blue chip guys, but also give him credit for getting people at Missouri enough on the same page to where they're willing to give millions of dollars in NIL to go out and get some of these guys. Like that law that the legislator passed up there to where Missouri signees can start getting paid early if they stay in state and all of that. Like that's all stuff that happens when people are aligned behind the program and a coach. So credit to drink on that. All right. That is what I've got on coach rankings. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you disagree. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you hate. Hop up into the comments and we can hash it out. All right. Got a few fun questions from subscribers, and then we're going to get out of here. Start with this from DawgsCentral user. Put Stetson on Mount Rushmore. Excellent username, sir. We have, it says, I am curious. Sorry, we got a question real quick in the chat. Does Georgia have that rule on paying? No, they do not have the NIL rule that Missouri has on being able to pay the in-state signees. Like, I forget, it's ahead of basically anywhere else. So it's an advantage for them, you know. You gotta find advantages at a place like that. All right, back to the question. I am curious on what you think the wrinkles will be in our offense that Kirby is talking about, how Bobo will develop in year 2 of this offense. I haven't specifically seen the comments that you're referring to from Kirby. As far as wrinkles, I think last year they kept Beck on a really short leash for the first, third to half of the season, and they figured out we can trust him to protect the ball, and they started to stretch the field more and more. So I think you'll see more vertical passing concepts. The biggest thing that I think you'll see from a wrinkle standpoint in this offense is running back usage in the receiving game. I think that Trevor Etienne opens up all sorts of interesting possibilities. I think that you'll see a lot of things that Georgia do, a lot of things similar to what Monken did with James Cook in 2021. I think the tight end usage will not go away, but I think it will wane a little bit. It'll be very interesting to see some of that. And I would expect, just my diagnosis of Georgia's run game last year was that they got a little bit too heavy on the zone runs and could have done some more stuff in gap scheme at times. I thought Dejan Edwards in particular was a really good gap scheme runner. I think like Etienne, Robinson, both of them might be comfortable with certain gap scheme concepts that they can kind of highlight more. So that would be my answer to that question. Where do we stand with CJ Wiley and Travis Smith? Obviously, those are two really good class of 2025 wide receivers coming up out of Georgia. One at Milton, and then I think one at Westlake is where Wiley is. But both like 6'3.5" to 6'4.5" with legit route running ability, 50-50 ball. They can do it all. I like where Georgia is with Travis Smith a lot. I believe James Coley will probably be at his, out visiting Smith on Friday at his spring game. Wiley is a guy that has really shot up a lot of boards nationally. Georgia's had a high opinion of him for a long time. They've been recruiting him hard for a long time. He also was the son of a 2-time All-SEC defensive end at LSU. If I had to, pick today, I would say I think that Georgia lands Travis Smith, and I think that they're still behind LSU in the recruitment for CJ Wiley. That's not to say they can't close that ground. That's not to say they can't pass LSU. I'm not close enough to that recruitment at the moment to know exactly what the decisions are being made around, but I would say that, I'm not ready to think that Georgia's going to nail down both those guys at this moment. I think they're going to do everything they can to try to make that happen. Tell me if the following coaches are overrated, underrated, or properly rated. All right. So this kind of goes back to what we just did. Dabo, I just gave you guys my opinion on. I think I think some people do underrate him for what he does culturally in terms of getting his guys to play hard. But I've seen him on some coach lists at 2 or 3 because of his history. I think that's too high. He's handicapping his program. That's the truth. Mike Gundy, underrated. Jeff Lebby, I don't have a super high opinion of Levy. I think he's a decent OC, but like, did Ole Miss's offense fall off in any way when he left for Oklahoma? No, not really. I don't know what type of head coach he's going to be at Mississippi State, but I, at this moment, I wouldn't say that he's being slept on. Clark Lee, I think, is a really good defensive coach and a really tough job. It's hard to draw too many opinions from how a guy does at Vanderbilt. I think they're committed to him for the long haul. I will start judging him when they finish that stadium. And, you know, I mean, like, you're probably playing with no NIL budget and you're asking kids to come and tour a construction zone for a stadium. I just don't know how you sell that. Jed Fish, I think, is underrated. I think Jed Fish is a really good coach, and I like what he does from a personnel quarterback kind of standpoint. I think that he can be good at Washington. I wouldn't be shocked to see him end up in the conversation around some SEC jobs in the next offseason or two. Uh, Although, maybe that won't happen because he did just move jobs a year ago. All right, last question of the night. What are your score position predictions for the following opening weekend games? Georgia versus Clemson, Miami versus Florida, Notre Dame versus Texas A&M, and Alabama versus Wisconsin. All right, let me pull up some spreads real quick. Jeez, hold on. Sorry, guys. Okay. Let's look at. So Georgia versus Clemson currently is sitting at. Can't believe that's going to be a noon game, but I suppose that's a different conversation, isn't it? I'll put it this way. I think that Clemson has enough on defense to where, like, if Georgia kind of comes out a little sluggish, they can give Georgia some problems on offense in a way that I don't think very many teams Georgia's going to face all year could. Like, I think that Clemson, they still do recruit the defensive line on a really high level that's probably a little underappreciated. So I could see Clemson, giving Georgia's offense some struggles for a quarter or two if they can stop the run, particularly if Georgia can run the ball in that game. It's going to get they're going to run the stadium. The thing I struggle with is I think even if things go really well for Clemson, I'm just not sure that they can, score 20 or over 20. And that's with like a lot of things going their way. I wouldn't be shocked if Georgia was able to, hold them into that like 10 to 13 point range, even. So I think if we account for the idea that Clemson's got some good defensive linemen and some decent personnel, um, maybe that's a little bit more of a pass heavy game for Georgia, but Georgia is always going to try and run the football. And so I could see them kind of having to shift mid game philosophically. I'm going to say Georgia 34, Clemson 13. That would be my guess today. Obviously, that's not, don't take it to the bank yet. I haven't done any like real breakdown of personnel versus personnel to preview that game yet. Miami versus Florida, that is going to be a really interesting game. I think that Florida is. Look, I don't think that Florida is going to be like, great this year, but I do think they're probably a little better than they're getting credit for. I also think that Miami, Cam Ward might be able to infuse that offense with some actual firepower. I'm going to go Miami 26, Florida 23. For Notre Dame versus A&M, mm, I think the problem with this for me is that Riley Leonard was not healthy enough to go through spring. And so I worry about new quarterback and a new offense. I know that he's an experienced quarterback, but like he hasn't really, fully developed as a passer. I think so. I'm gonna say that they struggle a little bit offensively. I think Elko is a guy that has kind of proven that he can come in and make a defense very effective off the bat. I'm gonna say that uh, A&M beats them 28-17. And then Bama versus Wisconsin. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I don't know what to make of Wisconsin yet. I haven't done a lot of work around them. I think that it helps. I think it kind of helps Alabama. Like they're not going on the road, right? Like that's a neutral site game. If I'm or is it at Wisconsin? Someone in the comments, is that game at Wisconsin? Let's see. Sorry, guys. This is great radio. So that's not a week 1 game. That's a week 2 game or a week 3 game, but it is at Wisconsin. I think by that point, so Bama opens with Western Kentucky and South Florida. They get to stretch the legs. I think they get to figure out what Milrow is or isn't a little bit. Yeah, guys, I'm gonna say Bama wins that game, but I think it's closer than the experts think. I'm gonna say Alabama gets them 28-23. Whatever the spread is, I would imagine that would involve Wisconsin covering it. But man, don't let Kalen DeBoer lose that game. Kalen DeBoer loses that game. Ooh, buddy, that is going to be a rough start to the new job. There's going to be a lot of people on his ass quick. So I'm not saying I think he will, but that's a tough spot. It's a little bit of a tricky spot. Wisconsin's, I think, a kind of an underrated place to play at. I thought originally when I read the question that was going to be a NFL stadium, but going up there on the road could be tricky. I just don't know. I don't know. Both those teams have so many question marks that I really haven't done. I'm about to get into like actual preview season now that the spring portal window is over and we know who's going to be where from a roster standpoint. We'll do some win total pods and stuff like that and really dig in. But at this moment, I'm not super well versed with what those teams have answers for yet. Uh, Question in the chat. Bonus question. What about the Texas and Michigan game? Give me Texas. I think Michigan lost so much personnel. I think their defensive line is going to be decent, but I don't believe in Anthony Orgy at all as a passer. I mean, like I'm not saying he can't be good. I just haven't, in the moments that I've seen him, I haven't really seen anything that has inspired me from a throwing the ball standpoint. I am not super bullish on Michigan this year. I actually think that they will miss. I think they'll miss the 12-team playoff. I think that they're going to struggle. Let's see, what's their schedule look like? 2024 football schedule: University of Michigan, Fresno State, and Ann Arbor. That will be a win. Texas loss. Arkansas State win. USC. Ooh, somebody's going to lose that game, and it's going to hurt. Minnesota. I wouldn't be shocked if Minnesota beats them. I wouldn't be shocked if Illinois beats them. I would expect Oregon to beat them. I expect Ohio State to beat them. They should take care of Northwestern and Indiana. Don't know what to make of Michigan State in year one of Jonathan Smith, but yeah, man, I'm definitely on the take Texas train at the moment for that early season matchup. I know that Michigan's still got some good pieces left on defense, but I still think that Texas is just going to score too many points for Michigan. Like I just don't think Michigan can win that game if Texas scores more than like 24 points. I just need to see something from Michigan's offense before I'm on that train. So that's what I got for you guys tonight. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back next week. About to head out to Santa Fe, New Mexico in the morning for my birthday weekend. So yeah, be back and I'll be a year older. I'll be 35 years old. So I'm slowly dying, but we'll hang out some more before I do. Hope y'all are doing well.